Welcome to the KISSBCP webinar series, where we discuss all things that relate to no building scenarios, to no people scenarios, no third-party supplier scenarios, and lastly, no systems, all combined to create Chaos the Dragon, which is battled by King Phoenix and his shield.
Your BC Hurdles to a winning plan, which will be presented by Tam Williams of Kingsbridge BCP. Jumping the hurdles involves identifying, addressing, and progressing BC plans past hurdles that delayed the completion of the plan or leave it collecting dust when momentum is lost. From getting buy-in to simplifying maintenance, during today's webinar, Tam will share with you tips and tricks learned from hundreds of business continuity professionals who've written thousands of plans that will help you jump some of the toughest hurdles in your planning. Before we get started, I'd like to review a few items so you know how to participate in today's event. By default, you have joined this presentation listening through your computer speakers. If you would prefer to join using your phone, just select audio in your control panel, click phone call, and the dial-in and access code information will be displayed. You will have the opportunity to submit questions by typing into the questions pane of your control panel today. You may send in your questions at any time during the presentation. We will collect these and address them at the end of today's broadcast. In addition, if you feel that your question may require a more detailed explanation than can adequately be covered here, be sure to email Tam with your question and she will respond to you directly. Today's webinar will also be recorded for later on-demand viewing, and as a registered participant, you will receive a link to this recording. I would now like to introduce our presenter, Tam Williams. Tam is a skilled and experienced business continuity consultant working with Kingsbridge BCP. She has honed her skills over the past 2 decades in a number of industries, including healthcare, research, information technology, manufacturing, and finance. During that time, she has facilitated business continuity workshops and delivered presentations at a number of business continuity conferences throughout North America and is excited to be joining us for today's presentation. Please welcome Tam Williams.
Thanks, Don. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining today. First, just would like to extend my thanks again to Don and Continuity Insights for hosting these webinar sessions. I know when I first started in the BCP space, I found these sessions were just a really great way for me to learn as much as I could in a very resource light and convenient way. And now that I've been working in the field for, well, what feels like forever, they now also provide me a great opportunity to collect my thoughts so that I can share my own learnings and those of my colleagues here at Kingsbridge BCP. I want to spend a little bit of time today first just introducing you to Kingsbridge and what we've been up to for the last few years, as that really kind of sets the stage for the content that I'll be sharing with you today. So just briefly, who is Kingsbridge? What gives us the background to speak with you today? We're a software and services company. We've been operating in the BCP space since 1983. We have a software as a solution or SaaS tool that hosts BCP and disaster recovery plans. And it has an integrated communications tool as well and mobile apps for both iOS and Android. We also provide a range of professional services. We write BCP plans, we provide on-site training, and we perform tabletop exercises, gap analyses, plan audits, that kind of stuff. Now, having said all that, we don't hold all the expertise in business continuity planning. Like all industries, the uncertainty is change. So like many of you, we attend the CI trade shows, among other shows each year, and do our best to learn from the great speakers and vendors and attendants and just try and stay on top of the latest trends. One thing we have recognized over the years, though, is that there's a lot of knowledge and experienced people that attend these shows that never actually make their way to the front of the room to share what's in their heads with the rest of the attendees. And this is not the fault of the shows, of course. With so many great speakers, there's only so much time that can be set aside to network with these people. And if you're like me, little on the introverted side, networking may not be your forte. I've often thought that there may be a person on one side of a room that just solved the problem that someone sitting on the other side of the room is currently facing. And yet it's not always easy to make a connection between those two individuals. So this led us at Kingsbridge to develop an interactive workshop that we've now facilitated in various forms across Canada and the United States. We've had hundreds of people working in business continuity planning across countless sectors participate in these workshops with the same premise driving each session. Tell us about the biggest hurdles you've faced in your business continuity planning work, and then we work together during the workshop, pulling from all the BCP expertise and experience in the room to figure out how best to get past these hurdles. So during today's session, I'll briefly share with you some of the most frequently identified hurdles, many of which I'm sure will be very familiar to most of you. I'll then spend the majority of the time actually discussing the specific strategies or solutions that participants came up with to overcome these hurdles. We'll start at the beginning of the planning process with the process of getting buy-in, and then we'll work our way through to the plan maintenance phase. So let's start with getting buy-in. Someone at your organization, it may be you, has identified that you need a business continuity plan. It could be an audit requirement from a regulator, a service level agreement and a contract with an important client, or just that nagging feeling keeping you up at night that if something happens, your company is woefully unprepared to recover. However, in order to get a business continuity planning process off the ground, you really need buy-in from senior management and those that will participate in the process. But what you often get in return are some of the hurdles you see here on this slide that I'm sure you've likely heard before. We don't have any budget for that. We don't have a resource to support this process. We have more important things to address, or that's a nice idea, but I think we'd be fine. And besides, we don't really have a problem with, insert your thread of choice here. Basically, their heads are kind of firmly buried in the sand. So where do you go from here? What seems to have worked for those that do have their business continuity programs humming along? Sometimes it takes a champion in just the right spot in your org chart to get things off the ground. Now, if this champion happens to be your president and CEO, well, you likely don't have much problem with getting buy-in. This isn't a hurdle of yours. But what if it isn't? There's usually at least one person at a senior management or executive level that feels strongly about business continuity, so you really just need to find them. It may even be your boss or your boss's boss. You'll need to dig around a little, perhaps in the risk compliance areas of your organization, or try sales, as they may need a BCP to meet an SLA. We've also been approached by IT departments who are confident that they have their disaster recovery ducks in a row, but they're concerned about that the business side of things isn't really prepared. It can also be someone who's responsible for communications and is worried about managing the company image, or even someone in charge of operations who sees where there are vulnerabilities in their processes. So you want to do your best first to sniff out who this person is, or if you're lucky, who these people might be. And of course, how do we leverage these champions should we find them? And this leads us to the second solution, which is never waste a good crisis. With the number of natural disasters that have struck the US in the last few years, it's pretty easy to find stories of businesses that have been caught unprepared and paid dearly for their lack of preparation, as well as those that did have plans and came out the other end relatively unscathed. Well, it might feel like a little bit like ambulance chasing at the time. It's these moments that you really want to share with that champion, along with how your organization could be next. And natural disasters aside, there's also plenty of incidents that have nothing to do with nature that can be leveraged in the same manner. The Center for International and Strategic Studies started tracking significant cyber incidents in 2006. They focus on government agencies, defense and high-tech companies, or economic crimes with losses of more than $1 million. Incidents such as a hacking campaign that knocked offline more than 2,000 websites across Georgia, including government and court websites containing case materials and personal data, is just one example of the 95 separate major incidents that occurred in 2019 alone. When these incidents come up in the news, these are the times to strike while the iron is hot and work with your champion to raise the question of whether you have both disaster recovery and business continuity plans that can handle such incidents. Of course, even better than these national news-making crises are the everyday smaller incidents that happen under your own roof. One real-life example from one of our clients. A janitor simply left a tap running on a Friday night in a sink, no big deal, except the sink had a rag in it. So eventually the rag plugged the drain and the water began flooding the sink and the surrounding area. Now, luckily in this case, an employee just happened to come in late that night to pick up something they had forgotten and noticed water running down the hallway. So what was quickly resolved could have been catastrophic for this, what happened to be a biotech company that had millions of dollars in lab equipment and active experiments on the go. When something happens, you have to ask yourself and ask your champion, what if it had been worse? What if that power outage had gone an extra day? What if that snowstorm had brought more snow or had impacted a wider area or had lasted a little longer? What if that tornado or hurricane hadn't just missed us? What if that vendor had been delayed one more day or week in delivering that widget? Other things that will often get management's attention are things like service level agreements, audit requirements, customers demanding to see business continuity plans. Whenever you can show in writing that having or not having a business continuity plan can impact winning or losing a deal, result in fines, audit findings, a tarnished reputation, an inability to operate altogether, those will often grab someone's attention. Money talks, and things that impact the bottom line will speak very loudly. Now, it may be that everything I've mentioned so far falls on deaf ears. Your champion isn't such a champ in the end. Your management brushes off the close calls that you and your competitors and neighboring businesses experience, and the threat of an audit or a request to see a copy of your BCP just doesn't scare them. This is where you may need to start small and piggyback a little off of other related efforts within your organization. So if you have a risk management department, there may be an opportunity there to take that program one step further and begin some business continuity activities, even if they just start with a little bit of risk mitigation effort. If you have emergency response procedures, such as evacuation or shelter in place, see if those can be stretched out just a little further, such as how are we going to communicate with everyone after we've had a significant fire and they've all gone home for the rest of the day? How do they know whether to come back to the office in the morning? These small next steps can add little kernels of business continuity planning and get the organization starting to think about recovery. So once you've managed to get some traction in your organization, there is then the task of actually putting a plan together, the threat risk assessment, the business impact analysis, not to mention actually writing the plan. Typically, even after you've managed to get some buy-in, the resource allocation tends to be a little less than you were hoping for. You still end up feeling like there's too much work for one person to do. And once the work begins, there's so much information to manage. The final plans may not reflect the realities of what the organization is resourced to provide, or maybe missing so much information. They don't reflect the reality of what the organization would actually do at all during a disaster. And sometimes you get a little bit of interest in the senior management level, but it just doesn't trickle all the way down to the people you really need on board to actually contribute to the plan development itself. They aren't seeing it as a priority, and as a result, they just aren't engaged in the process. So how do we overcome a large amount of work that generates a lot of information to manage, all the while trying to produce a realistic plan while working with an unengaged workforce? Perhaps this sounds familiar to some of you. So first, let's consider rethinking the threat risk assessment. The actual risk assessment doesn't have to be a big part of your business continuity planning process. While risk mitigation is a critical piece to keeping your business safe and operating smoothly, you don't actually have to complete your threat risk assessment in order to start writing your plan. Ultimately, no matter what threats you're exposed to, at the end of the day, whether your building burns down, a pandemic strikes, you're the victim of a cyber event, or a tornado rips through, you're left ultimately with 4 possible results or some combination of 4 possible results. First, no building. The physical location where your staff go to work each day or where you produce your widgets is partially or completely uninhabitable for a period of time. Could be the result of a fire, a tornado, a gas leak, or an active shooter, whatever it is, you got no building. Secondly, no people. Whether a pandemic has struck the region, a hurricane, or other regional emergency has left your workforce with personal responsibilities that take precedence over their work responsibilities, or the chicken was a little undercooked at the office holiday party, you're missing critical people and or a critical number of people required to continue business as normal. Third one is no systems. Could be your data center is wiped out, or your connectivity to your data center or systems is wiped out. Construction in your parking lot, for example, taking out your internet connectivity, a significant fire, or even just a disgruntled employee releasing their frustrations on your server room can all leave you with no access to some or all of your systems. And lastly, no third-party providers. Whether they supply you with software as a solution, courier services, power to your building, or the raw materials you require to manufacture your widgets, these days, more and more companies are outsourcing, and the ability of those vendors to continue operating impacts your ability to continue operating. So if you're tight for time and resources, and you need to get a draft of that BCP together and quick, you can consider skipping the threat risk assessment for now and just ensure your plan is written such that you're prepared for no building, no people, no systems, no third-party suppliers, or some combination thereof. So we dodged the threat risk assessment, but what about the business impact analysis? Everyone says we have to do that. And now there's certainly a movement within the business continuity space that questions the need to do a business impact analysis. And I'm not going to get into that debate today, but the discussions are really interesting to follow, and I do encourage you to participate in them. But for now, let's assume that you do want to or need to complete a business impact analysis. The BIA process uncovers a wealth of valuable information for your plan. There are other ways of getting that information, but this is one method. It establishes priorities and required resources to help ensure that everyone in the company is playing from the same playbook during the recovery. And it provides you with an opportunity to validate the disaster recovery solution your IT department has in place to ensure that it will meet the needs of the organization. So this helps to ensure that the plan you write is realistic for your organization. Now, having said that, there's still some things you can do to simplify that BIA process. First, avoid open-ended questions. This generates a huge amount of information to sift through when the surveys are complete. If you have Excel referred to as Excel, MS Excel, Microsoft Office, and Office, makes it really difficult to collate results. Where possible, try and provide defined lists of resources that those completing their surveys can choose from. And this makes collating results so much easier. Secondly, only ask for what you're going to use. There are lots of very expansive BIA survey questionnaires available, but sometimes they collect way more information than you require. I've seen some doozies when I've done some plan audits. Particularly in a small to medium-sized organization, one example that I sometimes see and I question is asking the number of people required to execute a specific process. And I understand why the question's being asked. At the end of the day, the planner wants to know, well, how many people and workstations do I need as recovery takes place? However, can lead to a lot of double counting. So for example, there may be financial activities that require 2 people due to the dual controls involved. So when asked how many people to execute a particular process with dual controls, the individual completing the survey might say, well, 2. And for the next financial process, they say one person is required. So one person is recorded. And the same for the process after that. So for 3 processes, it may look like we need 4 people, 2 for the first process that has dual controls, and 1 for each of the next 2 processes. However, what is not asked is how much of the day is consumed by executing each of these processes. Perhaps the same 2 people that do the first process can easily do the next 2 as well. In actual fact, it may be only 2 people that are needed for these 3 processes. But if we ask how many people we need at an individual process level, we can end up with a highly inflated number. Capturing this data creates extra time for those completing the survey, extra time for the person collating the information, and all the while leading to some misleading results. Once the BI data is captured and the recovery time objectives for each of the processes is decided upon, it's more helpful to then look at all of the day 1 processes together and decide how many people a whole department might need to execute those processes, and repeat that for each subsequent day. So with a bare bones BIA survey, you cut down on some of the volume of information you need to deal with to complete the analysis. But there is still a lot that needs to go into the plan for every department, not to mention the rest of the material that makes a full plan: the scope, the purpose, policies and procedures, the table of contents, the vendor lists, the contact information, etc. This can all feel very overwhelming to everyone involved. Once it's written, no one is going to want to review this giant volume that's been assembled. So the next suggestion we got from our workshops was really keeping your audience in mind when you're writing your business continuity plan. And one of the best solutions I heard to sum this up was the 3-binder rule. And the rule is actually not really 3 binders at all, but rather refers to the equivalent amount of information that you would find in a binder, a pamphlet, and a business card. So let me explain. The full binder worth of information is what your auditors want to see. This will include the plan's introduction, the scope, the purpose, the policies, the change logs, as well as the response plans for all of the teams. Your emergency response procedures, such as your evacuation plans, etc., will be in here, along with your BIA data, results of various exercises or tests that you've done in the past, as well as who attended these events. Much of this information is critical for demonstrating that you have a complete and effective plan that you've been diligently maintaining. However, for each of your teams, they don't need all this noise. Way too much information for them. They don't need all this to respond. They need about the same amount of information as you could fit into a pamphlet with whatever supporting documentation they may need to reference, like paper forms or manual procedures they may need, depending on the scenario they face. The rest of your organization, those not directly involved in the recovery process, those that don't sit on a specific recovery team, really needs the amount of information that you could fit on a business card. They need to know that there is a BCP in place, and they need to know who to contact or who will contact them to provide them with instructions once health and safety concerns are addressed and it's time to recover the business. So think about a binder's worth of information for the auditor, a pamphlet's worth of information for the response teams, and a business card's worth of information for the rest of the organization. Where you need to focus the majority of your energy in writing your plan is on the pamphlet portion. This is where the rubber hits the road in terms of recovering the business. Once the team responses are together, then worry about the binder's worth of information you need for the auditors and the business card snippet for the rest of your organization. So how do you get a plan that truly reflects the reality of your organization, keeping in mind, of course, that recovery will almost never go entirely as expected? To get a realistic plan, make sure you have the right people at the table. If you only meet with people at the high end of the food chain, you'll miss critical resources and processes that take place that more senior managers may not be entirely aware of. On the other hand, if you only meet with people from the front line, they won't necessarily have the big picture perspective to judge whether a resource or a process is truly critical. You need to have a cross-section And some of those senior managers, particularly the new ones, need to check their ego at the door and allow those who report to them to speak to how a process actually works so that educated decisions can be made regarding how quickly it needs to return and how it can be modified if required. Another resource that is beneficial to have at the table if you can is IT. Your technology folks are an invaluable resource during the BIA and the plan building process. They can validate the true system needs or suggest workarounds. A good example of this is when departments identify the company intranet as a critical resource or dependency. Most company intranets are just a shortcut to information that is stored elsewhere. IT can tell you if and where to find that form, system, or web address directly when the intranet is not up. Nowadays, many of the systems companies use are accessed through a web portal, but most end users don't actually know whether what they're accessing is a local system or something hosted off-site, whether there's a designated IP address required for the site or a certificate or token that needs to be installed locally on their computer. I've seen departments plan to have everyone work from home only to discover that the systems they need to access can't actually be accessed remotely. So your IT department can help you sort through all of this. And of course, they're absolutely necessary to provide you with the organization's disaster recovery capabilities. A recovery time objective of 8 hours for a business process is not realistic if the system required to execute that process will not be up for 16 hours. Lastly, how do you get individuals to actually participate and not tune out of the BCP process? We'll talk about this a little more when we get to maintenance, as many of the same solutions apply. But first, this is where you'll really want to leverage whatever champion you've been able to find in your organization. Compose an email outlining the importance of the BCP process and ask your champion to review it and send it from their email account. If you compose it, it's not a lot of extra work for them, but having an email come from senior management emphasizing the importance of everyone's participation in the process raises the profile and priority of their BCP obligations. I always say before I worked in the BCP space, if my boss didn't say it was a priority, I didn't think it was a priority. It would always have to come up from up the food chain. Once you have participants in the room, really spend some time educating them about the importance of BCP and share the stories you may have used for the purposes of getting buy-in. Emphasize close calls for your organization or a neighboring business or competitor can make the process seem that much more important. Similar to when you're writing your plan, you will still find you're having difficulties getting participation and resources when it comes to exercising your plan. Participants may feel they don't have time to participate in an exercise, or equally, they may also have some fear or trepidation about getting a failing grade from the whole process. For those that do participate, you may also have to deal with some skeptics. One of the biggest challenges when it comes to exercising a plan is dealing with those in the room that like to poke holes in the scenario, either justifying why the scenario as outlined will never happen or it could be so much worse. They like to what if the scenario to the point of worldwide apocalyptic conditions when business continuity would normally take a back seat to human health and safety. Lastly, tabletop exercises are extremely valuable for uncovering gaps in a business continuity plan, information that might be missing, or recovery strategies don't turn out to be as effective as once thought. While in the room, there tends to be lots of discussion about what needs to be reevaluated and what information needs to be added to the plan. But once everyone leaves the room, traction is quickly lost. 3 emails in and the outcomes of the exercise are completely forgotten by the participants. The same gaps and strategy weaknesses remain and can show up year after year. So how do we overcome some of these exercising hurdles? First, try to keep your exercises short and frequent, definitely at the start. Don't plan anything too elaborate, especially at the beginning. Short exercises targeting known areas of weakness with very few injects can be just as beneficial as all-day elaborate events, particularly if you don't have an overly engaged group or are working with people that have very little experience exercising a business continuity plan. If you have trouble getting buy-in to set aside time to have a tabletop exercise, look to opportunities within your organization to conduct mini exercises. One I often recommend is just targeting 1 or 2 recovery teams at the next routine evacuation drill. Once everyone is out in the parking lot, ask what would they do if they were told they were not going to be back into the building for an unknown period of time? Do they know where their business continuity plan is? Do they know what they should be doing? Do they have contact information for the rest of their team? Do they have basics such as a laptop and cell phone to allow them to work remotely? Often tabletop exercises are referred to as tests, and the term test can make a lot of people nervous, dreading the coming exercise before they've even participated, fearing they will fail. Be sure to emphasize in the invitation that goes out, as well as at the start of every tabletop exercise, that they have been invited to help improve the business continuity plan and are not being measured on their performance. Ultimately, if the participants do not have everything in their plan to allow them to move through the tabletop exercise to a successful conclusion, it's the plan that needs improvement, not the individuals who are referencing it. As for the skeptics in the room, it can be a challenging group to deal with. First, do establish ground rules for participation, and one of the most important ones being stick to the information in the scenario as written. Any scenario can unfold in a multitude of ways. Establish that you are here to exercise this particular path. If there are variations on the scenario that participants would like to discuss, use a parking lot to leave those discussions to the end, or incorporate them into another scenario for another tabletop exercise. For the really unruly participants, this is kind of a last resort, but you can always inject a step where the difficult participant is called away to attend to a personal emergency and now unable to respond until the scenario indicates that their personal emergency is over and they are now available again. Sometimes they still like to pipe up, but at least you have a good excuse at that point to get them to simmer down a little. Lastly, there is no point in exercising your plan if nothing is done with the results. Set up expectations in advance of the exercise with your senior management or board of directors that the results and an action plan will be forthcoming. With that expectation set, it will be hard to avoid meeting that deliverable. Also be sure to communicate organization-wide that a tabletop exercise was conducted, what scenario was exercised, and who people can contact that would like more information. You may find some engaged people in your organization that are willing to help the process along that you weren't initially aware of. Let's move on into maintenance. The hurdles here you see on this slide, we heard over and over again, and I'm sure you've run into them yourself. There's just too much work involved in maintenance, and it just isn't a priority relative to other tasks that people have to do. And more of an outcome of poor maintenance is that sometimes the plan ends up in the wrong hands, either those that are no longer in their role or department, or even worse, those that have already left the organization. So how do we make maintenance more manageable? First, try and incorporate it into your change management process. If you have project plans that are used when you bring on a new department, new software tool, new service or business process, those more significant changes that take place in your organization, ensure that somewhere in that project plan, the question is asked, how does this influence our business continuity plan? If changes to the plan can be made at the same time as some of these larger organization-wide changes are made, there won't be so many updates to make on the plan when the routine maintenance window for the plan comes around. Makes the task seem a little bit more manageable. As for smaller changes such as contact information, reference documents, team membership, etc., I find breaking these into smaller chunks that you're only assigning a small 10-minute piece of work to be completed within a relatively short deadline is helpful. The participants in our sessions found that long deadlines only make the task seem that much longer as people drag their feet to complete it. If they can do 10 minutes of work once every couple months, maintenance doesn't seem to feel as painful. Also keeps BCP front of mind. Also be sure to leverage technology. If you're still trying to maintain your BCP in a Word document, then you are going to find maintenance quite tedious. Invest in some business continuity software that will tell you when areas of the plan need to be updated, and you'll save yourself a lot of time and effort. This will also help with preventing your BCP from ending up in the wrong hands, as technology can assist by automatically revoking access to your BCP for individuals that are not included in the latest personnel list. Just this week at Kingsbridge, we released a free version of our software. So if you're interested in looking into that offer, you can find the URL on the screen. We just released it on Monday. Don will also be sharing the slides by email for this presentation. So you'll have that URL again when you get the slides from Don. You can also go to kingsbridgebcp.com, and from the software drop-down, simply select free tool. Now, even with simplifying maintenance, there will still be those that just don't see BCP as a priority. So workshop participants suggested you need to find ways to make it a priority. You may need to lobby to have some policies put in place to enforce planned maintenance on a regular cycle. For those that have a formal performance review process in place, include BCP related items in their goals for the year, and then measure individuals against those goals during their performance reviews. Ensure job descriptions include mention of BCP related responsibilities. For those that are subject to BCP related regulations and audit, a reminder that the auditors are coming, or that a significant client wants to see evidence of an updated BCP, can also help light a fire under folks. So in general, what did we learn from this series of workshops? There are a few themes that stood out. First, keep it simple. Whether it's keeping your BAs to a short, manageable set of questions, simplifying your plans just to the most needed information for each team to respond, keeping your exercises short and targeted, or breaking your maintenance up into manageable chunks, keeping it simple is definitely a theme that stood out. Secondly, leverage opportunities. That may be the upcoming audit, or finding that champion in upper management, using the near miss that happened to you or a neighboring business, using the fire alarm that provides the opportunity for a targeted mini exercise. Always look for those opportunities. Definitely think about working smarter and not harder. Leverage BCP software to simplify your maintenance process. Don't let the naysayers take over your tabletop exercise, and partner with IT as your disaster recovery allies. And lastly, learn from your peers. Next time you're at a conference, don't be shy to ask the person beside you about a challenge you're having with your planning process. More than likely, they have ideas for you to try and may have some help, and you may have some helpful suggestions for them too. And with that finishes the formal presentation. So I will leave it in the hands of Don to pose any questions that have come up.
Oh, thank you, Tim. Yes, we have some time, so let's jump into the questions that have come in today. And I just want to remind everybody who's online right now that you can still submit your questions through the questions pane in your attendee control panel. Our first question is, Tim, you mentioned some strategies to deal with people that don't want to participate, but I feel like I've tried most of those and I'm still not getting any traction. What do I do so that this doesn't reflect badly on me as the BCP coordinator?
Great question. Of course, you're always going to have groups that still don't want to participate. You've tried everything and they're not budging. And to be honest, there really is only so much you can do. This is where you want to focus your energy on those that are engaged, highlight their cooperation with your champion or senior management. Do what you can to not only recognize their work directly, but hit senior management to do the same at staff meetings, internal newsletters, etc. Sometimes that'll put some pressure on the less eager groups. For the rest that aren't so eager, their lack of recognition in the eyes of management may get them moving. But worst case scenario, because you don't want it to reflect badly on yourself, you just need to really document everything. Get a written attestation to the completeness of their plan and their readiness to respond, and then at least you've got yourself covered. If there are audit findings or these groups fail to recover from an event, you have evidence that you did everything that you could to try and get them prepared.
Okay, thank you. Our next question, when it comes to getting BCP information out to all employees and not just response team members, how would you suggest getting that information out?
A few ideas actually came up at our sessions. You can use it part of the onboarding process for new employees. You can ask that a small little piece in there be used towards BCP. Departmental meetings or all hands meetings can also be used as opportunities to get that information out. I mentioned incorporating it into the change management process really keeps it front and center. If they're expected to take action, magnets, intranet pages, pocket cards with important phone numbers are helpful. If people are going to be receiving instructions, they need to know where those instructions are coming from. So those little tools are helpful. If it will be via a tool that is not part of the everyday, make sure you test it. So like if you have a notification tool or something like that, make sure you use those. Make sure they have the phone number that those notifications will come from programmed into their phone. Every time you test that, it's like a little reminder for everyone that we do have a business continuity plan and that these things are important. So that's just a few little things that you can do throughout your organization to try and keep BCP front and center and get information out to everybody.
Okay, great information, Tim. Next question is, I find that the vast majority of BIA responders have no idea as to the financial impact of an outage. How do you accommodate this missing information?
Well, I have to admit, I find the same thing. And for this reason, we at Kingsbridge actually don't tend to encourage capturing specific financial impact, at least not in dollars and cents. It can be very resource intensive, as you can imagine. When you have a department, you know, who really doesn't have a clue, there can be a lot of digging and resources invested in finding this. We tend to just use an impact scale when measuring the impacts of an outage. So this can include financial impact, but we also do things like reputational impact, operational impact, legal impact, etc. And we just rate each of these types of impacts on a scale of low, medium, high, critical, and then even a not applicable. And then we develop an aggregate score for that business process in question. The other thing to keep in mind is that when you capture this information from each department, if that's the approach you're taking with your BIA, ultimately you're going to want to get a sanity check on it from management. They're going to have a better sense of the financial implications. So I find these impacts that we capture are really just a starting point, and it's really to give management an idea of where the areas of concern are. And when they go through and do their sanity check on the recovery order for all the business processes in the organization, they can then dig into the true dollars and cents financial impact if they find it's going to be important to how the recovery is going to be planned for the organization.
Okay. Our next question. You mentioned earlier using a software tool to assist with managing a BCP. Are there basic features that we should be looking for?
Well, there are tons of different products on the market, and all will promise that they have the best solution for you. And we sell software, so my opinion is biased. But I do write plans, and I use our software for writing plans. So all I can tell you about are the features that I find most useful when writing or updating plans. So if you're looking at software, you may want to look for these features yourself as well. I do find templates to make the plan writing faster are really great. So for example, we have custom templates for all the functional areas or departments. So the HR template will look different from the finance template, which will look different from the manufacturing template, et cetera. So in our standard software, there's 30 some teams and they all have unique and different templates to get you started. And we even have templates for different sectors. So if I'm working with a financial institution like a credit union, I have a credit union template that has different templates for branches versus lending departments, et cetera. So that's one thing I find helpful, especially if you're writing your plan from scratch, is the templates are really get you off and running really quickly. Databases that support some intelligent merge functionality are helpful, so that if you're uploading information like vendor lists and personnel tables and other resources, it's really quick to get it into the database section of your tool, and then you can use that information in other areas. And if information changes, you just need to change it in the database, and it'll then change all through your tool. And that intelligent merge functionality is really important, so you can keep updating those databases without having to do a whole lot of manual work. Let the tool's intelligence do those updates for you. Last couple of things, I guess, last modified dates, knowing when a document was uploaded or added to the plan so you have a sense of how old it is and whether or not it needs to be refreshed is really helpful. And who updated that document last, you know, who to go to find out who gave you that version. Those are really helpful. And then I do find our built-in communication tools, I found a lot of our users have found really helpful. It's one personnel table you upload, and that will support, you know, your SMS messaging, your emails, your conference calls, etc. So those are just a few things. There's lots of different features you can look at for software. As a plan writer, which is my main focus at Kingsbridge, those are just the tools that I think I find most helpful. I'm sure there's others, but those are the ones that come to mind.
Okay, thank you, Tim. A lot of great questions today, and some really great answers and information you provided as well. Unfortunately, we've run out of time, but I want to assure anybody who has submitted questions today, and we did get a lot of them, that Tam will personally reach out to you with an answer to the question you submitted. And I want to remind everybody else, if you do think of any new questions, you can reach out to Tam directly at the address that's currently shown on the screen. And a final reminder that we will be posting a recording of this webinar on the Continuity Insights website in a few days if you missed any part of today's broadcast, and we will be providing you with a copy of today's slides. So as we wrap up, I want to thank you, Tam, and I want to thank everyone for attending today's webinar, Jump Your BC Hurdles to a Winning Plan. On behalf of Continuity Insights and our corporate sponsor, Kingsbridge BCP, thank you for joining us and enjoy the rest of your day.